Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a really challenging idea drawn from some potent material we've been looking at. It puts forward this pretty stark proposition. What if the real battle for power, isn't fought with armies or force? What if it's something much more subtle, something happening, well, deep inside the human mind?
It's definitely a view of influence that feels, almost unnerving. The material we're diving into today, it talks about the ruthless power of emotional control. And it really doesn't pull any punches when describing the strategies involved. It's quite blunt.
Absolutely. So our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack these core ideas, understand the, frankly, chilling strategies it describes. We're not endorsing them, obviously, but the material itself comes with this really powerful warning.
It does. The warning is crystal clear. If you don't grasp how this kind of psychological power works, how it operates on someone's internal landscape, then you're incredibly vulnerable. Vulnerable to those who do understand it and use it.
Right. So prepare to look at influence, maybe even your own interactions, in a new, possibly unsettling light. Because the premise here, it's unambiguous.
It really is. The central claim this material makes is that power today, fundamentally, it's psychological. It's about dominating hearts and minds, not just, physical territory or resources. And the consequence it spells out is brutal fail at this, and you will be conquered. That's the language it uses.
Wow. So it's presented not as some academic theory, but as a cold strategy, a fundamental law of how influence operates now.
Exactly. That's the core warning right there. It shifted. It's not about winning arguments with logic or applying direct pressure anymore. It's about understanding and, shaping the internal world of others. And this material, it lays out a specific principle that governs this.
Okay, what's that principle?
Right. The core law, as it's called, is basically this. Don't attack defenses head on. Forget direct confrontation. Instead, you dissolve those defenses. You bypass them by appealing to something deeper within the person.
Deeper, like their emotions.
Emotions, yeah, but also their identity, their sense of self, their personal longings, maybe things they aren't even fully aware of.
So the goal isn't just breaking through resistance, but making resistance kind of irrelevant because you've captured their inner world.
Precisely. The material argues that if you conquer that inner world, people will follow you willingly. It becomes their choice. It feels like their own internal desire, not something forced on them from outside.
And the flip side, if you ignore this, if you just rely on logic or authority.
Well, according to this material, that's a path to failure. People will just reject you or ridicule you or maybe just tune you out completely because you're not speaking the language that truly motivates them. You're missing the emotional core.
Okay, that's a heavy concept.
Yeah.
And to really illustrate this, the material uses a historical case study, one that, seen through this lens, apparently takes on a chilling clarity.
Yes. Madame de Pompadour. Or Jean Poisson before she got the title. And the material's very specific. Don't look at her story romantically. Think of it as a demonstration of this psychological law in action, almost like a cold-blooded blueprint for this kind of influence.
Right. Her rise from what was a pretty obscure middle-class background to wielding this immense lasting power over King Louis V, essentially shaping France through him. That's the prime example.
It is, and her background is absolutely crucial to understanding why her approach was so different and so effective. She came from a family with, a scandalous history. Her father fled over financial issues. Her mother was a courtesan.
So no traditional path to power in Versailles for her. No noble lineage.
None whatsoever. Within that rigid hierarchy, she had zero standing based on birth. But she was prepared differently.
How so? What kind of preparation?
Well, she seemed to understand power from a different angle, and she was deliberately groomed for it. Her mother's wealthy lover, a man named Tourneham, saw something in her and invested heavily in her education.
But not just standard schooling, right? The material highlights other skills.
Exactly. Things like singing, literature, music, dancing. Skills that sound like mere accomplishments, but this work frames them very differently. It calls them tools for emotional enchantment. Tools for performance, for captivating conversation, for weaving a certain kind of spell.
So she was taught how to perform, how to engage, how to influence subtly through charm, wit, cultural sophistication.
Yes. She was cultivated to have this magnetic quality, something that could outshine the perhaps more superficial elegance of the court nobility. She was basically being prepared for a very specific kind of stage, targeting a very specific individual.
And that target was King Louis XV. How does the material describe him? What was he like?
It paints this picture of a man really burdened by the crown, feeling inadequate, constantly living in the shadow of Louis XIV, his legendary predecessor. He was bred for the throne, sure, but he struggled with the immense pressure, the expectations.
And how did he cope?
The material says he retreated, pulled back from the public performance of being king, seeking solace more in physical pleasures, hunting, women. And the court, of course, saw this as weakness, lack of seriousness.
Okay, so the court saw weakness. But Jean Poisson, soon to be Pompadour, she saw something else.
She saw, and this is a key phrase from the material, a man starved of meaning.
Starved of meaning. Wow.
Yeah, and this is where her strategy was fundamentally different from, say, other women at court who might just try to gain influence through sex. The material dismisses that as easily replaceable. Pompadour understood Louis needed something far deeper, something more sustaining.
So she didn't just offer physical pleasure, she offered him an illusion of greatness. What does that mean, practically? How did she do that?
She made herself indispensable, primarily by curing his chronic boredom, which the material suggests was a really profound affliction for him, a deep ennui. She filled his days with stimulating, refined experiences. She organized these elaborate private theatricals, hosted intellectual salons where philosophers would gather. She provided witty, engaging, sophisticated conversation. She basically wrapped herself in culture and intellect.
So she became the source of excitement, of intellectual stimulation.
Exactly. She wasn't just appealing to his immediate desires, his base instincts. She was speaking to his aspirations, the king he secretly wished he could be.
Ah, right. The material said she held up a mirror, but not to his flaws.
Right. But to the image of the king, he longed to embody a patron of the arts, a philosopher king, a man of taste and depth. She appealed directly to his desperate longing for purpose. While others may be focused on the flesh, she, as the material puts it, touched his soul.
And this connects directly back to that core principle, that law the material talked about.
Yes, this is how she embodied it. Make people feel that by following you, they are becoming the best version of themselves.
She didn't just make him feel good about her.
Exactly. She made him feel better about himself when he was with her, elevated, more purposeful.
And that deeper psychological connection, that's why she lasted.
Yeah.
19 years, right? Far longer than any other mistress.
That's the argument. She wasn't just a temporary pleasure, easily discarded. She became tied to his very identity, his sense of self-worth, his purpose. She propped up the image he wanted to have of himself.
Now, talking about this kind of, emotional control, psychological power, it inevitably brings up ethics. Does the material address that?
Oh, it does, head on. And with pretty brutal honesty, it specifically warns against letting sentiment cloud your judgment on this. It doesn't really entertain the idea of ethical persuasion in this specific context.
Really? So it just calls it what it is?
It calls it manipulation, unequivocally. It states it's always a weapon, regardless of how you try to dress it up or what your intentions might be.
So even if you genuinely believe you're influencing someone for their own good, using these methods, the material still labels it manipulation.
That's the perspective presented, yes. The point isn't about the nobility of your goals, it's about the mechanism. You're influencing someone's internal world. You aren't forcing them, true, but you're guiding them subtly so they feel the conclusion, the decision was entirely their own.
Because you understand them better than they understand themselves, and you use that knowledge.
That's the crux of it. And that, the material argues, was Pompadour's genius. She didn't demand power. She didn't ask for the position of prime minister. She simply made the king believe on a deep emotional level that he absolutely needed her presence, her taste, her guidance, her perspective.
And the result was, extraordinary influence.
It really was. Officially, she was just the mistress, but she functioned in almost every meaningful way as his prime minister. Her opinions shaped state policy. Her tastes dictated culture, art, fashion. For nearly 2 decades, she held France in her grasp.
Not through official authority.
No, but by making the king want what she wanted, it's power exercised without the appearance of power, which is key.
It's a chilling kind of effectiveness.
Yeah.
And the material doesn't just analyze her, it actually tries to distill her approach into specific strategies, right?
Yeah.
3 key principles.
Yes. 3 strategies for wielding this kind of influence, and always with that underlying warning, these are potent, dangerous tools. Use with caution, or at least awareness.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first strategy is laid out quite starkly. Observe, like a predator, not a participant.
Wow, okay. The instruction is blunt too. Shut up, stop trying to impress, stop trying to explain, just watch.
Yeah, it urges you to adopt the mindset of like an anthropologist studying a tribe, or as it says, a predator. Every detail matters. Body language, tone of voice, what makes them laugh, their vanities, their hidden fears, their insecurities.
The idea being that most people just give themselves away if you're patient enough.
Pretty much. They're too busy performing or talking about themselves or trying to persuade you. The biggest mistake, according to this view, is assuming others think like you do. They don't. Everyone inhabits their own unique emotional world.
Their own internal landscape.
Exactly, with their own specific fears, hopes, triggers. You can't hope to influence them effectively until you understand that specific internal world first, before you even try.
So patience and observation becomes a weapon. And impulse, jumping in too soon, is a weakness.
Absolutely. Your restraint, your willingness to just observe and listen without judgment, without interrupting to insert your own view, gives you a huge advantage. It's a fundamental warning against projecting yourself onto others. Stop assuming they're like you.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the second strategy?
The second is closely related. Appeal to their ideals, not just desires.
Okay. So, distinguish between amateur and master manipulators.
Right. The material suggests amateurs offer immediate, maybe fleeting, pleasure or gratification. Quick fixes. Masters, however, offer something much deeper. A sense of purpose, validation, elevation, something that resonates with their identity.
Like Pompadour again. Making Louis feel like the king he wanted to be, not just keeping him entertained for the moment.
Precisely. She didn't just cater to his base desires. She appealed to that deeper part of him, maybe dormant, that yearned for greatness, for significance. People, this material argues, fundamentally want to believe they are noble, deep, special, capable of more than their daily reality suggests.
So the strategy is feed that belief.
Yeah.
Reflect back to them the person they wish they were. Become tied to their aspirations.
That's the core principle. Become the embodiment of the ideals they hold or want to hold for themselves. Make them feel more realized through you. And when someone feels they are genuinely becoming more, becoming a better, more elevated version of themselves through their connection with you, the material gives another strong warning here. They become incredibly bala. It uses that specific word, suggesting a profound devotion, being bound to you. A deep, almost unbreakable loyalty forms.
Because you're now fundamental to their enhanced identity, their sense of self-worth.
Exactly. It's a very powerful bond.
Okay. And the third strategy, this one sounds like it ties it all together.
Yes, the third feels like the ultimate execution. Make your influence seem invisible.
The ultimate deception, the material calls it.
That's the term used. Because control must never feel like control. The moment your influence is perceived as influence, it triggers resistance. That deep human need for autonomy kicks in.
Like Pompadour again, she didn't issue commands right. She guided, suggested.
Precisely. Her power was in its subtlety, suggesting, inspiring, subtly steering conversations, framing options, leading the king to conclusions in such a way that he genuinely felt they were his own ideas, his brilliant insights, maybe just gently encouraged by her.
So the stark warning here is, if you want to keep this kind of power, this hold over someone's heart and mind, you absolutely cannot let them see your hands on the strings.
The most effective puppet masters, from this perspective, are completely invisible. The moment the strings are glimpsed, the illusion shatters. The spell breaks. Your power dissolves instantly.
Okay, so after laying out these quite potent strategies, the material circles back to that initial warning, doesn't it? But with even more force. It talks about the grave dangers of ignoring these principles, ignoring this law of psychological power.
It's an explicit, severe caution. If you don't take the time to understand this stuff, how to operate on hearts and minds, this work argues you just inevitably become a tool, a pawn in the hands of those who do understand it and are actively using it, whether you realize it or not.
So you end up being led by others' emotions, their moods, their subtle influence, without even seeing the mechanisms at play.
Correct. You become susceptible. And maybe worse, when you try to assert your own will or gain influence yourself, you'll likely fall back on the wrong tools. Brute logic, factual arguments, maybe even trying to force things. And the material warns, quite explicitly. In this psychological landscape, those approaches will just lead to rejection, ridicule, or simply being ignored.
Because you're speaking the wrong language.
Yeah.
A language nobody is really listening to or moved by on that deeper level.
Exactly. You might feel you're being direct, honest, telling it like it is, speaking truth to power maybe. But in the world this material describes, a world fundamentally ruled by perception and emotion. Brute honesty isn't presented as a virtue, it's framed as a weakness.
Because influence isn't about objective truth.
It's about creating and shaping belief. That's the core distinction.
That is, yeah, a profoundly cautionary and frankly quite unsettling perspective on human interaction. And through this lens, Madame de Pompadour's story, it really shifts from just being a historical anecdote into something much more instructive in a way.
Yes, the material presents her legacy not as a romance or even just history, but as a detailed blueprint for emotional conquest. It summarizes the key takeaways from her life, viewed strictly through the application of these psychological principles we've been discussing.
What are those key takeaways about her legacy, according to this work?
Okay, so first, that the key to lasting power, not just fleeting influence, is achieving genuine emotional intimacy, connecting deeply beyond the superficial. Second, that true seduction in this power context isn't about coercion at all. It's about orchestrating things so the other person feels they're making the choice. They're choosing to follow you, connect with you entirely of their own free will.
Making it feel like their idea.
Exactly. Third, that maybe the most potent weapon in this arsenal isn't beauty or status or force, but the ability to elevate another person's sense of identity, making them feel bigger, better, more significant through their connection to you, tapping into that ideal self.
And the final point about her.
That she successfully controlled a man, the king, and through him, shaped an entire kingdom's destiny, all without ever appearing to exert that control directly, maintaining that invisibility.
Her story, seen through this specific, rather cold framework, becomes a masterclass in applying these principles of psychological influence.
Emotional control, yeah. It's presented that way.
Which brings us full circle, back to the final provocative warning this material leaves us with. It's quite a closer.
It is. The ultimate caution is that the real battlefield for power isn't out there in the physical world. It's internal. It's the complex, messy landscape of the mind. Every person in this view is a kind of maze. A maze of emotions, ego, insecurities, deep-seated needs, unmet desires.
And the ability to understand that maze, to navigate it effectively, that gives you control over the person themselves.
That's the chilling conclusion presented. And the warning against dismissing this whole idea, maybe labeling it as just manipulative or immoral and therefore irrelevant to you, is severe. The material states very plainly that in what it calls the game of power, the naive, those who refuse to see or understand these psychological dynamics, they just get devoured.
Wow. Devoured. Okay, so the core message, the final stark reality presented here is conquer the heart and the mind will follow. Ignore the heart and you will lose both.
It really forces you to confront this uncomfortable possibility that influence often operates beneath the surface of logic and reason, down in the often messy, irrational realm of human emotion, ego, and self-perception.
It really does make you pause and reevaluate interactions, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If power truly operates this way, under the surface, making people feel like they're just making their own choices, I mean, how do you even begin to recognize these strategies being used on you?
Yeah. That's the absolutely critical question this kind of knowledge forces you to ask, isn't it? It's not just about how to use this, but how to see it. How do you navigate a world where influence might not be about truth or logic, but about someone subtly shaping your beliefs by understanding your deepest internal landscape, maybe better than you do yourself?
How do you protect yourself when the most effective power feels invisible, when it feels personal, like genuine connection?
Exactly. And that's why this knowledge, as difficult or unsettling as it might be, is presented not just as a tool for gaining influence, but as absolutely essential for recognizing it, for defending against it. Essential, this material argues, simply for survival, or at least for maintaining your own autonomy, in a world where these psychological games are constantly being played whether we like it or not.